and you don't have any. Okay. All right, Brother Varner, do you want to say anything when we get started? All right, so we're going to go ahead and get started. This evening, we are discussing Black substance use and some preventive measures that our people can implement in our families, communities, collectives as a central part of our culture. So you can come in and ask questions, or you can contact me. And my email address, you can use the Kimya at kimyaanddentist.com to contact me if you have any questions or concerns, or you can use the Kimya at 365diversity.com. So, want to highlight first, we're talking about substance use. So, one of the components of substance use is to understand, we're talking about substances that are considered to come from nature, and also substances that are considered created in the lab. And that's important to highlight because one thing I always explain is that nature includes chemicals as well. Some of these substances that have the highest incidence and rates of use, abuse, and overdose are substances that come from nature. You can look at examples like cocaine, opioids. So I want our people to know that just because they say something comes from nature does not mean that it doesn't have chemicals. It does not mean that you can just use it and that it won't negatively impact your body. When I say body, we're talking about from the top to the bottom. And it also does not mean that it will not have a negative effect on any other chemicals that you're taking, whether it's vitamins, prescription medications, or anything else. So I always want to highlight this because a lot of times when we're talking about substance use, people think that we're only talking about illegal drugs, and they need to understand we're talking also about legal substances. We're talking about substances that come from nature. I also want to highlight when we're talking about substance use and talking about preventive measures, you want to understand this, that substances, whether you call it drugs or whatever terminology you want to use, have existed since the origins of humans. We're talking about a long, long, long time. Different forms of substances around the world. So as Africans, we cannot falsely claim that issues of substance use, overdose, addiction, and these issues that run in families as well, similar to mental illnesses as well, we can't pretend that as Africans, we did not have this issue until certain changes were made on our people. So that's another focus that I want our people to have. The history of substance use, the history of natural chemicals, the history of laboratories. So when we talk about scientists, we ourselves as Africans have a history of thousands of years as scientists, as the original Africans. So laboratories that create these substances are not just outsiders doing that as well. So I just want to give that introduction because a lot of times when we talk about substance use, people think this is just something that the government brought in, is a drug trade. Trust, substances, people find it. We can use all types of examples of the ways that humans have always wanted something that gets you high, something that takes you away. Some substances can seem relaxing, and substances can be quite intense in how they impact your body. We have examples of substances you can buy from the store. So we talk about if you go to Office Max, for example, and get the spray to clean off your keyboard. They had started requiring people to have their ID. Why? Because people were using the keyboard cleaner as a substance. Also, examples when you go to corners at corner stores, gas stations, and people are buying pills from these places. They're buying anything that these places have, and they don't know what's in the pills. It could be some kind of powder that you can buy it at the front counter of the gas station, and the counter, it says something like it's a form of Viagra, but it comes from nature. Look here, people make a lot of money by promising a lot of things. And that's very important for us to understand the problems of that. Further, I always encourage our people to have medical and health professionals. So, neurologist, gynecologist, your general doctor, your mental health practitioner, anything that you need. I always tell our people, create a list. And I also help our people to find good medical and health professionals. So, when having these appointments, and we're talking about consistent appointments, not just when you feel pain, because you don't want to just go to the emergency room. We're talking about preventive measures. So that's why we want appointments that you're expected to go in there every few months or every year, depending on the type of mental health or physical health profession. But when you go to these appointments, you also tell them, what do you put in your body? So that's also part of the data that they're collecting for you. They're going to say, give us a list of your vitamins, give us a list of your medications. All of this information will include if you're buying certain items from the gas station, if you're on Viagra, if you're on Kratom, if you're on anything, if you bought something on the street corner. You need to let your medical and health professionals know that, not just the ones who are giving you prescription medications, but just in general, they need to know that because they want you to understand how this is impacting your bodies. So with that understanding, when we're talking about substance use is very prevalent among our people specifically, when talking about our people, for various reasons. One of the reasons includes when we're talking about the history, family history of why people get sick, people having issues of alcoholism, drug use, and people having deaths as a result of using substances. A lot of times, Black families in particular, and this is Black families around the world in particular, oftentimes do not have those honest discussions about people having issues regarding chemical dependency. And that's discussions of people struggling with alcoholism, people struggling with being addicted to prescription medications, anything. A lot of times that's not discussed, particularly in Black families. People can use spirituality or religion as an escape from those discussions. People can say all types of things. And when people pass away, a lot of times people are not talking about the factual cause of death. And of course, when you look at cause of death information, it could be different causes of death for one person, but you want to understand that substances have an impact on people's bodies from top to bottom. So that's another thing that I always talk about with particularly Black families. What does it mean to have honest, open discussions about issues from generation to generation? It doesn't mean that you have to feel like you're telling everyone's business, so you don't always have to call people out by name, but you do want to highlight that we do have a history of our family on addiction. The same as a lot of times Black people highlight things like diabetes. We're quick to scream, somebody got the sugar, which is type 2 diabetes. We're quick to talk about high blood pressure a lot of times. As Black women, we're quickly told the history of fibroid tumors, emergency hysterectomies, and so forth. So if we're not secretive oftentimes about that, even if our people have a history of not going to the doctors as much, and Black women tend to go to doctors more than Black men, but if we're quicker to talk about the history of certain body health issues, we need to also share information about mental illness. And sometimes it might not be a diagnosed mental illness, but family members are wondering if that might be something that's going on. We need to talk about that when it comes to suicide. And we also need to talk about that when it goes to substance use. So have those honest, factual discussions about the history of substance use in families. A lot of Black people, perhaps most Black people, will learn that they have substance use sometimes on both sides of the family, and people don't want to talk about it a lot. But if you go to like a substance use training or mental health training, it could be mental health first aid, it could be a Narcan training. A lot of times people don't want to have those discussions. So we always tell people you don't have to have these discussions in trainings, but these are discussions that we want to have in families. So that's highlighting one preventive measure, what it means to develop these family environments where it's not a secret that there's a history of substance use in the family. Therefore, when you say it's not a secret, you have these conversations, you're not labeling people and stigmatizing them, you're not shaming them, you're telling future generations that if you're struggling with something, if you feel tempted to try something, think about something that could be genetic, biological, it could be learned behavior, but think about how that's something that comes from our family from generation to generation. Sometimes people struggle with alcohol consumption and substance use because that's their form of stress. And we talk about that in terms of people's experiences, aggression, stress, anything that's could be outward expressed in the form of violence potentially, and it could be inward expressed. And inward expression can be forms of suicide, self-harming behaviors like slicing one's wrist without the expectation to pass away. And it could be substance use, including alcohol. So these are the kinds of discussions that families should have. Further, when we're talking about family having these discussions, I want our people to look at all of this like a diagram. We're talking about Black culture. So Black culture is at the top of the diagram. One part of our culture, we're talking about our families, Black families. So what do we discuss in our families? When we talk about discussions in our families, we're talking about also making sure that the people in our families know that they have a say-so. They have an impact on their lives. We don't want anyone to think that they cannot control their bodies, they cannot control their minds, they cannot control their actions. It's just someone else somehow making them use these substances. And the example I always use is when we're talking about issues in cities, particularly Black parts of cities across the nation, where the city funds, the bank loans tend to go to particular demographics of people who are putting liquor stores, tobacco shops, and all these other types of shops in Black parts of cities. So we know that's happening as Black people. Now we have to say, okay, what are some ways that we within our culture can reduce our use of these sources? Like any other time people want to talk about boycotting, right? Well, let's talk about the real boycott that doesn't have an announcement like that doesn't have a timeline. Because I'm going to tell y'all, if you announce a boycott and say, we're going to boycott for this week, people do not care about a boycott that has a start date and an end date. So it has to be something consistent. What are you not going to use? Therefore, they're going to go out of business because no one's using it, period. Not because of a hashtag on the internet, not because of a certain day, certain month, permission slip from some group, but because we know it's not something for our people. And we know it's targeting our people who already have a history in their families of substance use, addiction, life stressors, such as unemployment, such as other issues that impact our people. So therefore, these are ways that families have to make sure our people are not just theoretically empowered, but also empowered in actions to know that we do have say-so. As Black people, we do impact the outcome. And that's a very important component there for our families. So under the culture, the Black culture, we have the families, and we also have Black communities. So Black communities, Wherever we are together. Even if we don't agree with each other, we have different viewpoints, different approaches, different actions, but we have to understand what is the end goal. That can look different ways, but what are the common denominators in that? So when talking about substance use, we want to make sure our people understand that you go to many cities across the nation and you can find a substance use clinic within walking distance of the liquor store. There's a substance use clinic within walking distance of a tobacco shop. And a lot of times people will say, well, there's nothing wrong with liquor, there's nothing wrong with tobacco. Okay, just because it's legal does not mean that it's not having impacts on people's bodies. The same thing as when we're talking about access to marijuana and the impact on people's bodies, driving under the influence and doing other things under the influence. Again, you're not labeling, stigmatizing, and shaming people. You're saying, here's a factual assessment of what's happening to people's bodies, to people's lives, and to people's outcomes, that we have to be empowered to change the way we want it to change. All right, so that's part of the Black communities. What's the role of Black communities? It doesn't mean that you have to be staunch in terms of these old traditionalisms. If people think that your viewpoints are outdated, you've got to update it, okay? Understand that we're not where we were centuries ago. So get yourself a 21st century. Hey, Emmanuel, thanks for being here. I appreciate you. So we have to update our perspectives, like we talk about for centuries of Black trailblazers. If you're going to use Marcus Garvey's UNIA approach with the Black cross nurses, update that to 21st century. If you're going to use W.B. Du Bois's work, because he also did health work, update that. Booker T. Washington did health work, update that. We have all this different work, updated, because you can never tell our people to go back to 18th, 19th century ideas and try to implement it the same way, because there's a whole different component there. We're talking about access to resources and how people have been told that they have to assimilate, they have to integrate, they can't just self-focus and culturally focus. So therefore, you're going to have to redesign to tell our collectives and our communities to, it's okay to go everywhere you want to go, but you have to stay focused on what is the impact that it's having on you. What is the impact that it's having on our people? All right. So again, Black culture on the top, Black families, Black communities, Black collectives are the organizations. It could be collectives like a small collective of people, informal, and it could be an organization that's an official Black organization. And we have millions of Black organizations. We have so many Black organizations, okay? I tell every Black organization, no matter the type of Black work that you're doing, and I always say Black work, whether it's religion, education stuff, I do economic development, so you could be doing economic development focus. You could be doing art work, right? As Harold Cruz said, art is one of the foundations of our people, because we're talking about Black artists are the scholars, intellectuals, and trailblazers of our people. You could be someone who's doing Pan-African work, Afrocentric work, Black nationalist work. Whatever your work is, your consciousness, your radicalism, your actions have to be based on the true meaning of our culture as a people. It cannot adopt non-Black approaches. You have to understand the foundation of our approach, and you have to put a health focus there. In other words, you need to understand the history of our people's work for centuries, radical groups, religious groups, all these different groups that recognize the problems of our people include health issues. And the health issues were not just saying, well, look what the government's doing to us. The health issues are also saying, look what we're doing to ourselves and each other. So what are we going to present to ourselves and each other to reduce that? And I really want our people to understand what it means to be that active in our development. We call it the development of our inner world. You can read works from Harold Cruz talking about our inner world. Even Septima Clark makes a reference to the inner world. We understand all these problems presented by the outsiders, but we can also make that focus on developing our inner world, because if you think that you're going to wait for the outsiders to stop doing what they do regarding health inequities, then we as Black people will pause and suffer because we're pretending that everyone else is going to change to help us. And that's just not the reality of how it works. So we need to take the guide that have been explained to us for centuries by our people and to understand the development of our inner world as it pertains to health. You can look at many examples, including the original form of the Black Panther Party, when they were actually truly successful in doing their work. Their focus was on Black perspectives, Black approaches, developing potential Black theories and concepts for Black actions, and that included having health trucks on corners. What it means when you have soup kitchens. You're feeding people, you're helping people read. They also did reading collectives where they welcomed disagreements and debates, because that's the true knowledge where not everyone is forced to agree. And then also, what does it mean when you're having these health resources on the corner of the streets, telling our people that we have nurses here, we have doctors here, we can test you, we can help you, okay? And they also addressed issues like alcoholism and drug use. It was, of course, based on this notion that to be a member of the Black Panther Party, even if you are out of prison, that you're not going to be using substances. And one thing we have to understand, that policy does not work 100%, because a lot of people are still going to use substances, but they're going to make it very secretive. And that's what we call that labeling perspective. The labeling is based on this notion that people do a lot of things off the record, under the table, and it's not until what they do is discovered by other people that people try to explain what they're doing, and oftentimes label and stigmatize them for doing that. So I just want our people to understand that we have a history of organizations and collectives for our people who focus on health. And I want every Black organization in 2024 and beyond to never erase that. We have religious groups. You can go to certain mosques, certain churches, even certain Black synagogues, and you will find that they are doing health screenings there for prostate checks. Black men tend not to want to go to the doctor to get anything checked, right? So what does it mean to bring these resources into our collectives? All right. So that includes when talking about substance use. You're not telling people that they are failures in life for using substances. Instead, you're having a discussion and an explanation as to whether people want to make those changes and what's needed to make those changes. All right. So again, Black culture, Black families, Black communities, Black collectives. Black culture still at the top, because we don't want to ever pretend that there's going to be perfection for direction and then redirection, because that is a false projection. And I rhymed intentionally on that one because I want our people to grasp that the whole purpose of Black evolution, which is beyond a revolution, the whole purpose of Black evolution is to make sure our people know that imperfections and failures are just a part of human existence. Now, let's talk about the resources that we are going to develop as individuals to make sure that these imperfections and failures do not end everything. And what are the resources that we're going to develop as a collective of a people? Again, it does not mean that everyone's going to stop consuming alcohol and substances, legal and illegal substances. Instead, it's saying that we're going to try to find a way as a culture of people to balance that use. We're going to start teaching more about driving under the influence includes when you're high on marijuana. Even if marijuana becomes legal, that does not mean that you get to be high 24/7, 365. I have helped some of our people who have been honest and they've said that they've struggled with substance use because of their mental illness. They didn't want to get on medications, so they used marijuana as a form of medication that they prescribed to themselves. Okay. So that's another example of chemical dependence. So we want our people to understand there is a choice here. It's something that we do have say so, we do have actions that we can take place. And I'm going to use Harold Cruz as an example here. So when you read his book, The Crisis of the Negro Intellectual, and then he sets out the proposed plan when talking about Black economic development, one of the parts of that, he used Harlem as an example. One of the parts of that is looking at how we as a people, we need to stop waiting for the government to step in and change everything. So the same thing applies when talking about city planning committees and the mayor's offices across the nation. We keep waiting for them to change the traffic light, waiting for them to change everything, telling them to do this, do that. Yes, we want to demand changes that are paid through our taxes. That's also why I tell Black people to demand financial audits so you know where your taxes are distributed, because that's a component of how the economic system has been integrated for over a century. So yes, make those demands. Meanwhile, though, we have to make sure we understand how we can make those changes. So Harold Cruz used examples of drug dealers. The example was Harold Cruz. Black people, we're talking about economic development, cultural development. What are ways that we can reduce the drug dealers ourselves? It doesn't mean we go out being violent towards drug dealers, okay? It means that we're trying to find ways. What are some ways that we can make sure that people are not selling drugs because that's their only financial solution? So in criminology, criminal justice, we talk about two types of crime in that sense. We talk about the instrumental crime. We talk about expressive crime. So expressive violence would be when someone is outraged, expressing anger and aggression. The instrumental would be something that has a purpose. And that could include substance use, selling, if people are selling because they need to make money from that sale. So Harold Cruz proposed that removing the drug dealers would be a factor. And of course, we would update it from what Harold Cruz is proposing because people are not on street corners like that as much. They are doing it online, they're doing it in stores, they're doing it everywhere. And substance use has become considered cool, unfortunately. And that includes when talking about fentanyl and other substances. And people are dying from this. And we cannot 100% blame the government for that because, again, the drug trade is something that's horrific. However, we cannot wait for all of that to change. We can't wait for all of that to stop. So as Harold Cruz would say, what are we able to do to implement some changes ourselves? Again, does not mean that we go in there being violent towards people who are selling. And again, you have to, like I said earlier, you have to know what Black organizations are doing now and have done over the centuries. There are examples in different cities, different states, where Black organizations have made a collaboration with people who would typically sell substances. And they'll say, we're going to get you into job training programs. We're going to get you someplace else so that you no longer feel the need. Now, remember, if you're going to help get people in the job training programs, you have to try to find job training programs that are going to be into careers that are higher income. Because a lot of people who are selling substances are making a lot more money than many people are making after 20 years of work in a certain occupation. So we have to have realistic expectation, realistic outcomes. Because sometimes we say, well, I know they'd rather just live alive, be alive. It doesn't matter how much money you make. A lot of people care how much money they make more than they care about being alive. So this is where for every generation, we have to just say, there are some people who care about making a lot of money and they're willing to risk their lives to do so. So therefore, if you're going to do some workforce development, job training, look at ways to get people into occupations where they can feel like they're using their skills in a way that's actually not just paying the bills, but getting whatever else they want from all that money. Okay? We have examples like Nation of Islam and other collectives that had made it so that people knew not to be selling drugs in certain areas or to not sell drugs at all. If they found out about you, there's going to be repercussions. And yes, this can, in some ways, it can be collaborations with law enforcement. The idea is not to call police as the first solution, of course, but as Black people, we just have to have realistic approaches because we cannot abandon every resource. Because it's easy to say what we will and will not do until something happens and we're like, okay, I'm not psychic. I did not foresee this happening. Okay. So the same thing happens when we're talking about substance use, addiction issues. Regardless of how much you do Narcan training, you want EMS there, yes, because I always say police are not first responders, EMS are first responders. Police will come with Narcan and so forth, but police are not really first responders. However, there are certain circumstances that pertain to substances where people might really want police there and not want EMS because EMS are not trained to deal with certain things that happen under certain circumstances. If you're ever involved in crisis intervention team training, which is CIT training, we oftentimes do it for law enforcement, but we also do that for other first responders. One of the videos that they used to show, the video was showing a Black man who was potentially dealing with substances, and there was blood all down his leg, and they needed the police to come in because nobody could stop him from doing what he was doing. And that was also a time where bath salt was discussed a whole lot. And so there have been many instances where people have chewed someone's face off because of bath salt, and EMS is not going to be able to handle that. EMS is to arrive when a person needs to be brought back, brought into the hospital or something. They're not there to stop the violence and to stop all of that. So these are all issues regarding substance use. So again, Black culture, Black families, Black communities, Black collectives, what are we doing to reach and teach each other, to help each other know that we're not shaming, we're not blaming, 100%. We know that there are people who have genetic links to their substance use. We know that there are people who might be taught in their families that you deal with stress by harming yourself. And harming yourself, like I said previously, includes suicide. It includes substances, unintentional overdose, and sometimes even intentional overdoses. We do have people who intentionally overdose, sometimes with the hope that they'll get attention from the intentional overdose, and sometimes with the hope that they will pass away completely and will not be able to be brought back to life. So we do want our people to understand those components. So again, what can we do about substance use as Black people? This is not one solution, and it's not quick. As Black people, we have to remember life is not quick. It's not quick in answers. It's not quick in outcomes. You might try to change your family and you get frustrated because you're like, why are people not listening to me? I tried to help my family and nobody's listening to me. People keep doing what they're doing. Well, people will do that, right? But perhaps you might notice that people are changing slowly, and they might be teaching that change to future generation. So sometimes as Black people, we have a tendency to give up on preventive measures. We have a tendency to give up on solutions because we want this quick conclusion. And when we feel like it's not there, now we just got to stop. And then stop means that we're stopping on focusing on our inner development. And then we're told to just blame everyone else, focus on the government, blame everyone else, when we have that time and attention that we need to self-focus and collective focus. So again, it's going to be disappointing. It's going to be exhausting. But this is where as individuals, we see how we're going to improve our health, ourself. And then as a people, we do the same thing. So substance use is a serious issue. It's no jokes, no matter how much rappers and also singers. We have a history of Black music, including Black soul music, all types of genres that talks about drug addictions, even if you don't understand their lyrics. That's what they're oftentimes singing about in not just United States of America, but different nations. You're hearing our people singing about it, and they're normalizing it. And we don't have to normalize anything, because I tell our people all the time, you can try to think something is cool to do, but if something bad happens, the people who celebrated you for doing the bad thing are not going to be there. A lot of times when people have an overdose, the people with whom they were doing the substances bounce, they completely disappear. Maybe they'll call 911 on the way to wherever they're going, but they rarely stay and say, yeah, we were all doing this drug and he just started, buzzing, right? So I want our people to know, when you're in collectives of people, or if you're by yourself, think about why you're consuming the substance. What is the end goal that you're looking for? And can the end goal be found elsewhere? Because we also talk about that when people are trying to get over nicotine, right? It's like, can you just breathe? Can you get a counselor, therapist? Can you do some meditation? Can we do some African drums? Is there something, right? Because a lot of times when I talk about Black art and Black health, we talk about art and health go together as well. So you all can contact me if you want to discuss this more. Thank you so much. Brother Varner.
Black diamond, black diamond. Black diamond, black diamond. Black diamond, black diamond. Black diamond, black diamond.
Grandpa Crump. Yee.
Say that they are living paycheck to paycheck.
You will be wealthier.
My wife and I were flipping our first house.
When you shift the way you see things, then your life is going to shift.
Money is a tool for what you want. Money is not what you want. You don't want money.
So that goes to show that you don't have faith when you do not take your money and put it into those accounts to earn interest. When you're scared thinking that something is going to happen, God says, who are you trusting in? Because I'm the one that has created the money system.
Well, I then got offered $350 million for my company.
It says you owe about $538,000.
That the individual and the individual family unit is responsible for filling their own cups.
I went from being homeless and living on the street to owning properties in Baltimore.
And that's why I decided to start a bank.
This is something that Martin Luther King spoke about.
Stupid mistakes and failures. We continued stumbling forward
because the Black community, for the most part, had to go in rent.